2015, I gave a talk at Johns Hopkins University on the topic of women and gaming. After it finished, a bunch of students gathered their chairs into a circle and continued to talk about the things we had just discussed. They expressed frustration over things like a lack of diversity in games, rampant misogyny and racism in online gaming spaces, and the lack of women involved in games production. Eventually, one male student asked, "So if people don't like video games the way they are, why don't they just make their own?" To be fair, his question points to a common misunderstanding about the accessibility of video game design, something that's been perpetuated by movements like the idea that everybody can make games. Do a quick Google search for teach yourself game design or how to code your own games, and I guarantee you'll find thousands of results that promise to do just that. Teach you how to make your own video game, usually for free. The abundance of these types of websites, along with workshops and summer camps, many of them targeting young girls and people of color to encourage them to pursue careers in game design, have helped create the narrative that now, literally everybody can make video games. Now, while these are important initiatives in calling attention to gender inequity within games development, today I want to challenge the use of the everyone can make games movement, or as I like to call it, ECMGM, as a sole solution to gaming's diversity concerns. Now, while more diversity in games development promises to bring fresh perspectives to a community that has long privileged select voices, I'm afraid that things like ECMGM may actually obscure forms of oppression faced by women, LGBTQ individuals, and people of color looking for a career in game design. So today, I want to talk about ECMGM, both the promise and perils, and then talk about how we can ensure that these inclusivity projects are actually setting up aspiring developers for long and fruitful careers in game design. One of the main motivations behind ECMGM projects is calling attention to and attempting to resolve gender and racial inequalities in game design. It accomplishes this through a variety of initiatives. So on one hand, there are training-based organizations like Girls Make Games, an organization that offers workshops and summer camps and tutorials to spark an interest in game design among young women. Then there's the internet-based DIY approaches. For example, game developer Zoe Quinn runs a curated list of websites that teach individuals how to program games, do their own game art, and other relevant game-making skills. While helpful, I see these DIY kinds of approaches as distinct from things like Girls Make Games, or Women in Games International, an organization that offers lecture series, workshops, and mentorship programs for women seeking long-term careers in the games industry. These types of initiatives offer more long-term support for people looking for a career in games, as opposed to initiatives that ask you to kind of find your own way. Therefore, I feel that ECMGM may perpetuate the idea that a road to a career in games is quick and effortless. To be fair, there are plenty of reasons why feminist gamers and game designers should support ECMGM initiatives. For one thing, despite the fact that more women than ever are pursuing careers in game design, they remain vastly outnumbered by men. According to a recent survey conducted by the International Game Developers Association, which surveyed over 3,000 industry employees from around the globe, 75% of the global games workforce identify as male, compared to 22% female, 1% transgender, and about 2% non-binary. Similar disparities are also reflected in terms of race. According to that same survey, 76% of the global games workforce identifies as white, Caucasian, European. The real irony of it, though, is that this lack of diversity in games development is not at all reflective of the people who actually play video games. A recent study published out of Northwestern University, for example, reveals that Black and Latino individuals actually spend more time playing games than white or Asian individuals. One of the hopes of ECMGM initiatives is that more diversity among people creating games will engender more diversity in the term of games that are offered to an increasingly more diverse audience of the people who play them. So to be fair, I can't emphasize enough how much the idea that anybody can go out and make a game is an important nudge of encouragement to young girls and children of color who've spent their whole lives playing games, but never felt that they had the means to make them themselves. ECMGM, however, may actually obscure forms of oppression that these individuals face. And moreover, places the burden of shifting gaming's culture of misogyny and racism and homophobia on the precise individuals marginalized by it, rather than asking the industry to change from within. Additionally, I worry that the rhetoric of everyone can make games makes it seem as if everyone does have the equal opportunity to produce games in the first place. My concern is that individuals may adopt the rhetoric of ECMGM initiatives as an unquestioned truth and enter into a career in game design both unaware and unprepared to deal with misogyny, racism, and homophobia that they may encounter during their careers. The promise of the independent games market, a booming sector of game development that privileges new types of game design and storytelling and game mechanics, further augments the illusion that it's individual developers who should be responsible for scaling institutional barriers. This is something that, unfortunately, oftentimes gets perpetuated. So for those who aren't familiar, indie games, kind of like their film counterparts, are small-budget programs often produced by a team of maybe 1-2 developers on a shoestring budget. The key is they don't have the backing from a large gaming studio behind them. So on one hand, this is nice because it frees them up to really experiment with different kinds of storytelling and gameplay and bring fresh perspectives to mainstream gaming culture, giving us more variety in what we're given. The trade-off, however, is because they're not backed by a large game studio, the onus of publishing and marketing their product falls squarely on developers' shoulders. And even in the era of digital distribution platforms like Steam, for example, independent developers compete with thousands of other independent developers, not to mention established franchises with loyal fan bases. Additionally, it's become increasingly hard to subsist on an indie developer salary. According to a 2014 indie salary report, which surveyed workers from around the world about how much money they make in a year, in 2013, the average salary for an independent games developer was $11,182, which, I might add, is a 49% decrease from just the previous year. So a lot of self-taught game developers get their first experiences with programs like Twine or GameMaker. These programs are really accessible game design software because they require little to no programming knowledge whatsoever. So while these two programs are awesome for learning how game code functions, they do come with limitations. Twine, for instance, restricts users to creating text-based adventure stories, like interactive fiction, kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure story. GameMaker allows for slightly more complex game making, instead relying on things like visual scripting and programming. But these programs will only take one so far in the industry. In order to really remain competitive, more advanced skills will eventually be required. The popular Unity engine is low cost and a nice alternative, especially for college students who are aspiring designers, but it does require significantly more technical knowledge and has a very steep learning curve. In an era where we're told that anyone can make a game, the independent market becomes saturated with inexperienced developers competing against established franchises and full-time professionals, not to mention their much larger marketing budgets. But this is a reality that sometimes gets obscured in ECMGM initiatives. In order to truly be the success that it can be, ECMGM must call for structural and cultural changes within the games industry itself. Attitudes about who plays games and who can even make a game in the first place have to change before hiring practices in the games industry can be free of things like gender and racial biases. The general work culture of the games industry must shift as well to become more amenable to people of diverse needs, whether it's childcare or a person with a disability, that might preclude them from working 70-hour-long work weeks. Fortunately, I think we're already starting to see some of this shift, in part due to the work of initiatives like ECMGM. Male game developers have begun speaking out against harassment against their female colleagues, as well as calling for more diversity initiatives in games hiring practices. But until we see structural, overarching change from games culture itself, the overall progress of ECMGM will be stymied. One of the ways that ECMGM can bolster its intended effects, then, is to better focus on efforts that prepare these individuals to enter into work climates that, frankly speaking, can be a little hostile to their presence at times. Earlier, I mentioned the organization Women in Games International. It's a professional organization that helps socialize women and other individuals looking for careers in games. In addition to their tech-based workshops that teach people things like audio design or coding your own games, they also equip them with tools and resources to help navigate many of the hurdles that I've talked about today. Moreover, their online mentorship program can be an indispensable resource for a new aspiring developer looking to navigate the industry. And because WIGI is an established organization with connections throughout gaming culture, they're in a better position to help guide individuals towards game studios that are known to have more welcoming work climates. Something that a solo developer going about it themselves would have a much harder time figuring out. And if you're an independent games developer looking to launch your first game, having an experienced mentor to help guide you through that process can literally be the difference between a success story and the all too common indie game failure. Now, that's not to say that we want developers operating in isolation from each other either. To really, truly be effective, ECMGM should encourage strategic partnerships throughout the games industry. Recently, the organization Girls Who Code, which teaches young girls programming skills, partnered with 20 leading firms from the tech industry, who have then agreed to give graduates of this program both paid internships and other opportunities. Now, although it's not game design specific, their Hire Me campaign serves as an ideal model that could easily be replicated by the games industry as well. Unfortunately, we are already starting to see commitments towards boosting diversity from some sectors in gaming culture, including the heavily male-dominated esports scene. In 2015, Intel announced a partnership with the Electronic Sports League, making a pledge to boost diversity among their ranks. ECMGM is a rallying cry for individuals who have grown up with games feeling unspoken for, to finally have a voice for themselves. But if the gaming industry isn't willing to hear those voices, then how much change can we truly expect? Yeah, it may be true that everybody can now make a game, but can we yet honestly say that everybody has the equal opportunity to make a career in games? This is the reality that ECMGM initiatives must reconcile with in order to make sure they're ensuring aspiring developers will have long and successful careers in game design. The late game development legend Satoru Iwata is often quoted as saying, "Above all, video games are meant to just be one thing: fun for everyone." It's going to take a whole lot of change from the gaming industry and a great deal of social pressure to make it all happen. But it is my sincerest hope that sometime in the very near future, the idea that everyone can make games will not just be a truism, but will in fact be the reality for gaming as a whole. Thank you.